Some men go looking for trouble. Others have trouble find them while they're just trying to buy a good bull. Jake Morrison fell into the second category on a dusty Tuesday morning in September, when he drove his beat-up Ford pickup into the Millerville livestock auction thinking his biggest problem would be whether to bid on the Black Angus or stick with Herefords. He had no idea that before the sun set, he'd be standing face-to-face with a man who'd been waiting 3 years to settle an old score. He had no idea that a simple cattle purchase would drag up secrets from his past that he'd buried deeper than fence posts. And he certainly had no idea that the quiet farming community he'd moved to for peace would become the stage for a confrontation that would test everything he thought he knew about right, wrong, and the price of standing your ground. But that's how it goes sometimes. You show up for cattle and leave with a fight on your hands. And Jake Morrison was about to learn that some fights choose you, whether you want them or not. Jake Morrison pulled into the gravel lot of Millerville livestock auction at 8:30 in the morning, the September sun already promising another scorcher. His Ford pickup coughed twice before settling into its usual rattling idle. 3 years he'd been coming to these monthly auctions, and the routine had become as comfortable as an old pair of work boots. Check the catalog, walk the pens, bid smart, load up, and drive home to his small ranch on the outskirts of town. Today felt different, though he couldn't put his finger on why. The auction yard buzzed with its familiar symphony. Cattle lowed from the holding pens, boots crunched on gravel, and the auctioneer's voice drifted from the barn where they were already running through the smaller lots. Jake grabbed his worn catalog from the dashboard and headed toward the pens to look at the cattle he'd marked yesterday. Jake Morrison. The voice stopped him cold. Not because he didn't recognize it, but because he did. Every muscle in his body tensed as he turned around, knowing exactly who he'd see standing behind him in the morning shadows. Danny Brennan looked older. 3 years had carved lines around his eyes and added gray to his temples, but the cold fury in his stare hadn't aged a day. He stood next to a shiny new Chevy truck, arms crossed, wearing clean jeans and a pressed shirt that marked him as someone who didn't work cattle for a living anymore. Danny. Jake kept his voice level, but his hands found their way into his pockets where they wouldn't shake. Didn't expect to see you here. I bet you didn't. Danny stepped closer, close enough that Jake caught the scent of expensive cologne mixed with old anger. Heard you'd settled down in our little community. Bought the old Henderson place. Playing farmer. The way he said playing carried 3 years of resentment. Jake had hoped those years had been enough time for things to cool down, but looking at Danny's face, he realized some wounds just festered instead of healing. I'm not looking for trouble, Danny. No? Funny thing about trouble, Jake. Sometimes it comes looking for you. Danny glanced around the auction yard, taking in the scattered groups of ranchers and farmers. Nice quiet place you picked. Good people here. Wonder what they'd think if they knew about Chicago. Jake's jaw tightened. That's ancient history. Ancient history? Danny laughed, but there was nothing humorous about the sound. Tell that to my brother's widow. Tell that to his kids who ask why Daddy never came home. The weight of old guilt settled on Jake's shoulders like a lead blanket. He'd known this day might come. You can't outrun the past forever, especially when you carry it with you like a scar. But he'd hoped. 3 years of quiet living, honest work, and keeping his head down had given him hope that maybe the past would stay buried. I need to look at some cattle, Jake said, turning away. Danny's hand shot out and grabbed his arm. Not hard enough to hurt, but firm enough to stop him. Several people nearby glanced over, sensing tension without understanding its source. We're not done talking. Yes, we are. Jake looked down at Danny's hand until he let go. Whatever you came here for, whatever you think you're going to accomplish, it won't bring Tommy back. No, but it might give me some satisfaction. Jake studied Danny's face, reading the calculation behind the anger. This wasn't a chance encounter. Danny had sought him out, planned this meeting. The question was why now, and what he intended to do about it. What do you want, Danny? Justice. Tommy's death was an accident. The inquiry cleared me. The inquiry. Danny spat in the dust. Internal investigation by cops investigating cops. Real impartial. Jake had heard this argument before, during the long months after the shooting. It had played out in newspapers, on television, in courtrooms and hearing rooms. 12-year veteran Chicago police officer Jake Morrison had responded to a robbery in progress. In the chaos that followed, Detective Tommy Brennan had been caught in the crossfire. Friendly fire, they called it. An accident that happened in split seconds when adrenaline and bad lighting turned friend into foe. The official investigation had cleared Jake of wrongdoing, but it hadn't cleared him of guilt. Nothing could do that. I've lived with it every day for 3 years, Jake said quietly. There's not an hour that passes I don't think about that night. Good. You should think about it. You should remember my brother's face every time you close your eyes. The auction barn's speakers crackled to life. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be starting lot number 47 in 10 minutes. Please take your seats. Jake glanced toward the barn. Lot 47 was the one he'd come for, a young black Angus bull with good bloodlines that would improve his small herd. Normal life, normal concerns, normal problems. But, standing here with Danny Brennan, those things felt like they belonged to someone else. I should get inside, Jake said. Go ahead. Buy your cattle. Play your part. Danny stepped back, but his eyes never left Jake's face. But, understand something. I didn't drive 400 miles just to have a chat. This isn't over. Jake wanted to ask what that meant, but he already knew he wouldn't get a straight answer. Danny was playing a longer game, building towards something. The smart thing would be to pack up and leave, find another auction, another town, another place to disappear. But he was tired of running, tired of looking over his shoulder, tired of letting the past dictate his future. I'll be around if you want to finish this conversation, Jake said. Count on it. Jake walked toward the auction barn, feeling Danny's stare burning into his back. Other ranchers nodded as he passed, friendly faces that knew him as the quiet guy who ran a small operation and minded his own business. Good people who had no idea that their peaceful morning was about to get complicated. Inside the barn, Jake found his usual spot on the bleachers, but he couldn't focus on the auctioneer's rapid-fire patter. His mind kept circling back to that night in Chicago, to the warehouse, to the split second when everything went wrong. He'd replayed it 1,000 times, analyzed every decision, every movement, every breath. But analysis couldn't change what happened. Tommy Brennan was still dead, and his brother was still angry, and somehow that anger had followed Jake to the small farming community where he'd hoped to find peace. The lot numbers climbed toward 47. Around him, ranchers bid on cattle with the casual expertise of people who'd been doing this their whole lives. Jake tried to study the black Angus bull in the ring, tried to evaluate its conformation and bloodlines, but his attention kept drifting to the entrance where Danny might appear at any moment. Lot 47, black Angus bull, 18 months old, excellent bloodlines. Jake raised his hand for the opening bid. The auctioneer acknowledged him with a nod, and the bidding began. It was routine, familiar, normal. But even as he focused on the competition, part of his mind stayed alert for danger, old police instincts that apparently retirement to a small ranch couldn't erase. He won the bid at a fair price and made arrangements for transport, going through the motions of ordinary business while his nerves stayed wound tight. When the auction ended, Jake lingered in the barn, hoping Danny might have gotten tired of waiting and left. But he knew better. Whatever Danny had planned, he wasn't the type to give up easily. Jake stepped into the bright afternoon sun and immediately spotted Danny leaning against his truck, patient as a cat watching a mouse hole. No longer alone, either. 2 other men stood with him, both younger, both carrying themselves with the loose-limbed confidence of people accustomed to physical confrontation. Not local ranchers. These guys had city written all over them, from their spotless boots to their carefully casual clothes. Jake weighed his options. He could try to slip out the back, avoid confrontation, hope Danny would eventually get bored and leave. Or he could face whatever was coming head-on. 3 years of peaceful living had made him soft in some ways, but it hadn't erased his core understanding of how these things worked. Running might postpone trouble, but it rarely solved it. He walked straight toward Danny and his friends. "Jake Morrison," Danny said as he approached. "Meet my associates. Kevin and Marcus drove down from Chicago with me. Old friends of Tommy's." The younger men nodded but didn't offer their hands. Kevin was tall and lean with nervous energy that showed in constantly shifting feet. Marcus was shorter, broader, with the build of someone who lifted weights and the eyes of someone who enjoyed using his strength for the wrong reasons. "Gentlemen," Jake said. "They wanted to meet the famous Jake Morrison," Danny continued. "The cop who killed a cop and walked away clean." "Danny." Jake's voice carried a warning. "What? That's what happened, isn't it? You shot my brother in the back and the boys in blue covered for you. Case closed, pension intact, early retirement to the country." Jake glanced around the parking lot. Most of the ranchers had already left, but a few stragglers remained, loading cattle or settling accounts. Normal people going about their normal business, unaware that the afternoon was about to take a dangerous turn. "You want to have this conversation, let's have it somewhere private." "Why? You ashamed of what you did?" "I'm trying to keep innocent people from getting caught in the middle." Danny smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "How considerate. The same consideration you showed my brother?" Kevin shifted restlessly. "Danny, maybe we should what?" Danny's voice turned sharp. "Drive 400 miles just to shake hands and walk away? I don't think so." Jake read the dynamics. Danny was the leader, but the younger men were eager for action. Dangerous combination. Leadership with a grudge and followers with no judgment. "What do you want from me, Danny? An apology? You've got it. I'm sorry Tommy's dead. I'm sorry it happened. I'm sorry your family's been hurt. But being sorry won't bring him back." "You're right. It won't." Danny pushed away from his truck. "But maybe justice will help." "What kind of justice?" "The kind the system didn't provide." Jake's blood chilled. This wasn't just about confrontation or harsh words. Danny had something specific in mind, something planned, something that required bringing muscle from Chicago. "You threatening me, Danny?" "I'm promising you." The parking lot had gotten quieter. Fewer witnesses, more isolation. Jake recognized the setup even as it was happening. Danny had chosen this place, this time, these circumstances for a reason. Public enough to seem coincidental, private enough for whatever came next. "Last chance to walk away," Jake said quietly. "For who?" Before Jake could answer, a new voice cut through the tension. "Everything all right here?" Sheriff Bill Harding approached from behind Jake's truck, moving with the deceptively casual pace of a lawman who'd been watching from a distance and didn't like what he saw. 60-something years old with gray hair and steady eyes, Harding had been keeping the peace in this county for over 20 years. He knew trouble when he saw it, and he was seeing it now. Danny's expression shifted, calculating new odds. 2 against 3 became 2 against 4 with the addition of the sheriff, but, more importantly, it became official. Whatever Danny had planned, it would be harder to execute with law enforcement present. "Just a friendly conversation, Sheriff," Danny said. "That's so?" Harding looked between the men, reading body language like a book. "You boys visiting from out of town?" "Chicago," Kevin said. "Long way to come for a cattle auction." "We had other business," Danny said. Harding nodded thoughtfully. "Well, I hope you found what you were looking for. Auction's over, most folks are heading home. Might be a good time for visitors to hit the road too." It wasn't quite an order, but it wasn't a suggestion either. Danny understood the subtext. Continue this confrontation and risk dealing with the local sheriff's department. Escalate to violence and risk serious legal consequences far from home. "We'll be around a while longer," Danny said. "Seeing the sights." "Mum." Harding glanced at Jake. "You heading home, Jake?" "Yes, sir." "Good. Drive safe." The sheriff walked away, but Jake noticed he didn't go far. Just far enough to give them space while staying close enough to intervene if needed. Small-town law enforcement at its finest. Danny watched the sheriff's retreat, then turned back to Jake. "Looks like you've got friends in local law enforcement. Bill Harding's a good man." "I'm sure he is. But he can't watch you 24 hours a day." The threat was unmistakable now. This wasn't going to end with harsh words in a parking lot. Danny had come here with a plan, and Sheriff Harding's intervention was just a temporary delay. "This is a mistake, Danny. The mistake was 3 years ago when they let you walk free." Jake looked at Kevin and Marcus, then back at Danny. Three men driven by grief and anger, 400 miles from home, with nothing to lose and old scores to settle. The smart move was to involve Sheriff Harding officially, file a complaint, get the law between him and Danny's plans. But that would just postpone the inevitable. Danny wouldn't give up. He'd wait, watch, plan, and eventually find his opportunity. "I'll be at my ranch if you want to finish this," Jake said. "Count on it." Jake walked to his truck, started the engine, and pulled out of the parking lot. In his rearview mirror, he watched Danny and his friends have a brief, animated conversation before getting into their own vehicle. They weren't following immediately, but they would soon enough. Jake had given them exactly what they wanted, an isolated location, away from witnesses and law enforcement, where whatever they had planned could play out without interference. As he drove the 10 miles home to his ranch, Jake's mind shifted from civilian mode back to the tactical thinking that had kept him alive during 12 years of police work. He cataloged resources, assessed vulnerabilities, planned contingencies. If Danny wanted a confrontation, Jake would give him one. But it would be on Jake's terms, on his ground, where he controlled as many variables as possible. The peaceful farming community where he'd sought refuge was about to become a battleground. The past he'd tried to bury was about to resurface with a vengeance. And the quiet life he'd built over 3 years was about to collide with the violent reality he'd hoped to leave behind. Jake Morrison had come to the auction yard for cattle. But he was driving home with a fight on his hands, and he had no idea how it would end. Jake's ranch sat on 200 acres of rolling pasture, bordered by oak trees and cut through by a seasonal creek that ran full in spring and fell to a trickle by late summer. The main house was nothing fancy, a single-story ranch style that the previous owner had kept in decent repair, but it occupied high ground with clear sightlines in every direction. The barn stood 50 yards behind the house, with holding pens and a small equipment shed completing the working part of the property. It wasn't much, but it was defensible. Jake parked his truck near the house and walked the perimeter, seeing his property through tactical eyes for the first time in 3 years. The gravel driveway wound up from the county road, long enough to give warning of approaching vehicles but exposed enough that anyone coming up would be visible from the house windows. Good fields of fire from the front porch and living room. The barn provided cover but also concealment for potential threats. The tree line could hide approaching men but would force them to cross open ground to reach the house. Old habits died hard. Even after years of quiet ranch life, Jake's police training kicked in automatically when danger threatened. He found himself thinking in terms of cover and concealment, fields of fire and escape routes, tactical advantages and vulnerable positions. The peaceful ranch that had been his sanctuary was transforming in his mind into a potential battlefield. Inside the house, Jake checked his gun safe and retrieved his service pistol, a .40 caliber Glock that had been his partner for 8 years before retirement. The weight of it felt familiar in his hands, muscle memory making the weapon feel like a natural extension of his arm. He loaded it with hollow points and clipped the holster to his belt, then added 2 spare magazines to his back pocket. The phone rang. "Morrison." "Jake, it's Bill Harding. You get home all right?" "Yes, sir." "Good. Listen, I ran those Chicago plates through the system. Vehicle belongs to one Daniel Brennan. Name ring a bell?" Jake closed his eyes. "Yeah, it does. Want to tell me about it?" Jake had hoped to avoid involving local law enforcement, but Sheriff Harding was nobody's fool. The man had survived 20 years of keeping the peace by being observant, cautious, and thorough. He'd recognized potential trouble at the auction and taken steps to investigate. Danny Brennan's brother was a Chicago police detective named Tommy Brennan. Tommy was killed 3 years ago during a robbery response. I was involved in the incident. Involved how? I shot him. Accidentally. Friendly fire situation in a darkened warehouse. The shooting was investigated and ruled justified, but Danny's never accepted that conclusion. A long pause. And now he showed up in my county looking for what? Revenge? I think so. He threatened you directly? Jake considered his words carefully. Danny had been careful with his language, staying just on the legal side of making direct threats. Nothing I could prove in court. But the implication was clear. Any reason to think he might follow through? He drove 400 miles with 2 friends to have a conversation at a cattle auction. That's not casual behavior. Another pause. You want to file a complaint? I can have them picked up, questioned, maybe suggest they head back to Chicago. That'll just postpone the problem. Maybe. Or maybe it'll make them think twice about causing trouble in my county. Jake appreciated the offer, but he knew Danny too well. Official intervention would only force him to be more careful, more patient, more creative in his approach. And Jake was tired of looking over his shoulder, tired of waiting for the other shoe to drop, tired of letting the past control his future. I can handle it, Bill. That's what I'm afraid of. You're a good man, Jake, and you've been a model citizen since you moved here. But you're also ex-police with combat experience, and if Danny Brennan forces a confrontation, people might get hurt. I don't want trouble. I know you don't. But sometimes trouble finds us whether we want it or not. If these boys from Chicago push things too far, you call me immediately. Don't try to handle it alone. Understood. After Harding hung up, Jake made coffee and sat on his front porch, settling in to wait. The afternoon was wearing toward evening, the September heat beginning to ease as shadows grew longer. His cattle grazed peacefully in the near pasture, unaware that their quiet world might be about to change. Everything looked normal, peaceful, exactly as it had for 3 years. But Jake could feel the tension building like pressure before a storm. Danny would come. The only questions were when and how. Jake's mind drifted back to that night in Chicago, to the warehouse on the south side where everything had gone wrong. The call had come in at 11:47 p.m., robbery in progress at an electronics warehouse, multiple suspects, shots fired. Jake and his partner had been first on scene, followed minutes later by Tommy Brennan and his partner from the detective division who'd been monitoring the radio. The warehouse had been a maze of shadows and blind corners, filled with stacked boxes and equipment that created 100 hiding places. The robbers had cut the power, leaving only emergency lighting and the occasional flashlight beam to mark locations. In the chaos, with adrenaline pumping and time running out, the good guys and bad guys had become indistinguishable silhouettes moving through the darkness. Jake had heard movement behind him, spun with weapon drawn, and seen a figure aiming a gun in his direction. Split-second decision. Shoot or be shot. He'd pulled the trigger twice, center mass, textbook shooting. Only after the figure fell did he realize the devastating truth. The gun had been a radio. The figure had been Tommy Brennan, trying to coordinate the search. And Jake's textbook shooting had killed a fellow officer. The investigation had been thorough but inevitable. Justified shooting under the circumstances. No criminal charges. Early retirement with full pension. Case closed. But, for the Brennan family, the case would never be closed. Tommy was still dead. His wife was still a widow. His children still asked when Daddy was coming home. And his brother Danny still blamed Jake for all of it. A dust cloud on the county road caught Jake's attention. Vehicle approaching, moving slowly like someone unfamiliar with the area. Jake set down his coffee cup and moved his hand closer to his holstered pistol. The vehicle turned into his driveway. Danny's Chevy truck, windows down, all 3 men visible. They drove slowly up the gravel road, stopping about 30 yards from the house. Close enough to talk, far enough to avoid seeming immediately threatening. Danny got out of the driver's side, leaving Kevin and Marcus in the truck. He walked halfway to the porch, then stopped, hands visible, posture non-threatening but alert. "Nice place," Danny called out. "Peaceful." "Usually is," Jake replied without standing. "Mind if we talk?" "Depends what you want to talk about." Danny glanced back at his companions, then walked closer, stopping at the bottom of the porch steps. "I want to tell you about my brother." "Danny, not the cop. The man. I want to tell you about the man you killed." Jake studied Danny's face, looking for signs of immediate violence. But Danny seemed calmer now, more controlled than he'd been at the auction. Still angry, but channeling it differently. "All right." Danny sat down on the porch steps, uninvited but not threatening. "Tommy was 2 years older than me. Star athlete in high school, scholarship to Northwestern, graduated magna cum laude with a degree in criminal justice. Could have been a lawyer, an FBI agent, anything he wanted. But he wanted to be a Chicago cop because he thought he could make a difference." Jake listened without responding. In the truck, Kevin and Marcus sat motionless, watching. He met Sarah in college. Married her right after graduation, bought a little house in Naperville, planned to fill it with kids. Took him 6 years to make detective, and he was proud of that shield like it was made of gold. Carried pictures of his kids everywhere he went, talked about them constantly. Drove his partners crazy with the dad stories. "Danny, let me finish." Danny's voice stayed level, but Jake heard the strain underneath. "Emma was 8 when you killed him. Michael was 6. They waited up that night because he'd promised to read them a story when he got home from work. Sarah called the station at midnight when he still wasn't there. That's when she found out her husband was dead." The words hit Jake like physical blows. He'd known Tommy was married, knew he had children, but he'd never allowed himself to think about the human cost of that night in the warehouse. It was easier to focus on the tactical situation, the split-second decision, the justified shooting. Harder to think about bedtime stories that would never be read and children who would never see their father again. "I'm sorry," Jake said quietly. "Sorry doesn't bring him back." "No, it doesn't." Danny stared out at the pasture where Jake's cattle grazed. "You know what the worst part is? Tommy always talked about you. Morrison, the patrol officer who was going places. Said you were smart, careful, someone who'd make a good detective someday. He respected you." Jake felt sick. "The night he died, Tommy volunteered to back up your call. He could have stayed at the station, let someone else handle it. But he heard your name on the radio and figured you might need help. So he went. And you killed him for it. It was an accident." "Was it?" Danny turned to face him. "You sure about that? You sure there wasn't some part of you that saw an opportunity to get rid of competition? Tommy was being fast-tracked for promotion, everybody knew it. Word was he might make sergeant before you. That's insane." "Is it?" Ambitious cop, jealous of another cop's success, dark warehouse with no witnesses. Jake stood up abruptly. "That's enough. Hit a nerve? You're twisting facts to fit your story. The investigation was thorough. Internal Affairs, District Attorney's Office, FBI oversight because it was officer involved. Everyone concluded the same thing, tragic accident. Cops investigating cops. How impartial. There were civilian witnesses. The warehouse owners, a security guard who saw part of it, forensic evidence that supported my statement. It wasn't a cover-up, Danny. It was a mistake. A terrible, tragic mistake that I have to live with every day." Danny stood as well, the brief calm evaporating. "You live with it in a nice house on a pretty ranch in a quiet town. Tommy lives with it in a grave." The conversation was spiraling toward violence. Jake could feel it building, could see it in Danny's posture and the way Kevin and Marcus had become more alert in the truck. Time to de-escalate or prepare for the worst. "What do you want from me, Danny?" What would it take to end this? Justice. What does that look like? Danny smiled, but there was no warmth in it. I want you to know what it feels like to lose everything. I want you to understand what you took from my family. And how do you plan to accomplish that? However it takes. Jake's hand moved instinctively toward his gun, but Danny stepped back, hands raised. Not today. But soon. I'm going to stay in town for a while, get to know your neighbors, learn about your life here. Find out what matters to you. And then, I'm going to take it away, piece by piece, until you understand what you did to us. You threatening innocent people? I'm promising justice. Jake descended the porch steps, closing the distance between them. Listen to me carefully, Danny. I'm sorry about Tommy. I'm sorry about your family. I'm sorry the investigation didn't give you the answers you needed. But, if you threaten innocent people, if you bring your vendetta to this community, I will stop you. How? Call the sheriff? File a complaint? I haven't broken any laws. Yet. Yet, Danny agreed. But, the night is young. Danny walked back toward his truck, then paused. By the way, I met some of your neighbors at the diner in town. Nice folks. The Hendersons who used to own this place spoke very highly of you. And that pretty schoolteacher who lives down the road was very friendly. What was her name? Rebecca? Jake's blood turned cold. Rebecca Walsh was a third-grade teacher who'd moved to the area about the same time Jake had. They'd become friends over the past year, sharing coffee occasionally and helping each other with ranch work when needed. She was kind, gentle, and completely innocent of the darkness that had followed Jake from Chicago. Leave her out of this. Out of what? I'm just mentioning a friendly conversation. Though I have to say, living alone like that on such a remote road could be dangerous for a young woman. All sorts of things could happen. Jake's hand moved to his gun, but Danny was already walking away. Careful, Jake. Sheriff's Department probably frowns on shooting unarmed men. Danny climbed into his truck and drove away, leaving Jake standing in his driveway with rage and fear battling in his chest. The threat to Rebecca changed everything. Jake could handle whatever Danny wanted to do to him, but he wouldn't let innocent people suffer for his past mistakes. As the sun set behind the oak trees, Jake realized his quiet life in the country was over. Danny had drawn the battle lines, and they extended far beyond Jake's ranch. The peaceful community that had welcomed him was about to become collateral damage in a war that started 3 years ago in a Chicago warehouse. Jake walked into his house and picked up the phone to call Sheriff Harding. It was time to make this official. But, as he dialed, another part of his mind was already planning. If the law couldn't protect Rebecca and his other neighbors from Danny's vendetta, Jake would find another way. He'd come to this town seeking peace. But sometimes peace had to be fought for. And Jake Morrison was about to remember just how good he used to be at fighting. The call came at 2:47 a.m. Jake jolted awake from restless sleep, his hand automatically reaching for the bedside phone while his other hand found the pistol he'd placed on the nightstand. Morrison. Heavy breathing, then, a woman's frightened voice. Jake? It's Rebecca. Someone's been at my house. Ice water flooded Jake's veins. Are you hurt? No, I don't think so. I'm not sure. I heard noises outside around midnight, but when I looked out the windows I couldn't see anything. Then, this morning I found tire tracks in my garden and my mailbox was knocked down. There's a note. What does it say? A pause. It says tell your friend Jake that the clock is ticking. What does that mean? Who would write something like that? Jake was already pulling on clothes. Lock your doors and don't go outside. I'll be there in 10 minutes. Should I call the sheriff? I'll handle that. Just stay inside until I get there. Jake threw on his clothes, holstered his pistol, and grabbed his truck keys. Rebecca lived 5 miles down the county road in a converted farmhouse that sat well back from the road, surrounded by pasture and scattered trees. Isolated. Vulnerable. Exactly the kind of target Danny would choose to send his message. As Jake drove through the pre-dawn darkness, his mind raced through possibilities. Danny was escalating, moving from veiled threats to direct action. The question was how far he was willing to go. Intimidation was one thing. Violence against an innocent woman was another entirely. Jake pulled into Rebecca's driveway and immediately spotted the damage. Her mailbox lay on its side, the post snapped off at ground level. Deep tire tracks scored the flower garden beside her front porch, deliberate destruction designed to send a message. The note was wedged under her front door, white paper stark against the dark wood. Rebecca met him at the door, still in her pajamas with a robe pulled tight around her shoulders. She was 32, auburn hair and green eyes, with the kind of natural beauty that didn't need makeup or fancy clothes. More importantly, she was one of the kindest people Jake had ever met, someone who spent her days teaching children and her evenings volunteering at the animal shelter. She didn't deserve to be dragged into Danny's war. "Are you all right?" Jake asked, scanning her face for signs of injury. "I'm fine. Just scared. I don't understand what's happening." Jake retrieved the note and read it. Block letters in black marker, "Tell your friend Jake the clock is ticking." Simple, direct, effective. Danny knew exactly how to apply pressure. "Rebecca, I need to tell you something. There are some men in town who have a grudge against me. They're trying to get my attention by threatening people I care about." Her eyes widened. "What kind of grudge?" Jake gave her the abbreviated version, focusing on the facts without delving into the emotional complexity. Chicago police officer, accidental shooting, victim's brother seeking revenge. Rebecca listened without interrupting, her expression shifting from confusion to understanding to fear. "So this is about you?" "Yes. And they came to my house because they think we're..." She trailed off, color rising in her cheeks. "Because they think you matter to me." "Do I?" The question hung in the air between them. Jake had been asking himself the same thing for months, watching their friendship deepen into something more complicated. Rebecca was everything he'd given up hope of finding: intelligent, kind, strong enough to live independently but gentle enough to nurture others. Under different circumstances, he might have found the courage to explore what could develop between them. But circumstances were what they were. "Yes," he said quietly. "You do." She stepped closer, close enough that he could smell her shampoo and see the gold flecks in her green eyes. "Then, we need to figure out how to handle this together." "No. This is my problem, my responsibility. I won't let you get hurt because of my past." "Don't I get a say in that?" Before Jake could answer, headlights swept across the windows as a vehicle turned into the driveway. Jake drew his pistol and moved to the window, peering through the curtains. Sheriff's Department cruiser, Bill Harding behind the wheel. "Expecting company?" Rebecca asked. "I called it in on the way over." Sheriff Harding climbed out of his cruiser, flashlight in hand, moving with the careful alertness of a lawman responding to a potential crime scene. Jake holstered his weapon and opened the door. "Morning, Bill." "Jake." "Miss Walsh." Harding touched the brim of his hat. "Got your message. What's the situation?" Jake briefed him on the vandalism and the note while Harding examined the tire tracks and damaged mailbox. The sheriff worked methodically, taking photos with a digital camera and making notes in a small notebook. "Tire tracks match the vehicle from yesterday," Harding said. "Same tread pattern, same wheelbase. Your Chicago friends are making themselves known. Can you arrest them?" Rebecca asked. "For what?" "Vandalism, criminal mischief, maybe intimidation if we can prove they left the note. But even if we can make charges stick, they'll bond out in a few hours and be right back at it." "So we just wait for them to escalate?" Harding studied her for a long moment. "Miss Walsh, how well do you know Jake here?" "Well enough." "Know anything about his background?" Rebecca glanced at Jake. "He just told me about Chicago." then, you know he's not exactly helpless. Question is whether we handle this through official channels or let Jake handle it his way. Jake understood the subtext. Harding was offering him a choice. Play by the rules and accept the limitations of the legal system, or take matters into his own hands with the sheriff's unofficial blessing. It wasn't quite conspiracy, but it was close. I prefer official channels, Jake said. Even if those channels can't protect Miss Walsh? Especially then. Harding nodded approvingly. Good answer. But I want you to understand something. I've got 3 deputies covering 200 square miles. I can't provide around-the-clock protection, and I can't be everywhere at once. If these boys decide to get creative, there might be times when you're on your own. I understand. Do you? Harding's gaze was steady, measuring. Because there's a difference between understanding the situation intellectually and being prepared to do what's necessary when the moment comes. Jake met his stare. I'll do whatever's necessary to protect innocent people. That's what I wanted to hear. After Harding left, Jake and Rebecca sat on her front porch, watching the sunrise paint the eastern sky in shades of orange and pink. Normal people would be getting ready for work, starting another ordinary day in their peaceful lives. But normal had become a luxury Jake and Rebecca could no longer afford. What happens now? Rebecca asked. I try to end this before anyone else gets hurt. How? I don't know yet. Rebecca was quiet for a long moment. This man Danny, the one who blames you for his brother's death. What was he like before? I mean, before his brother died? Jake considered the question. He hadn't known Danny well during their Chicago days, but they'd crossed paths occasionally at police functions and crime scenes. Good cop. Solid reputation. Family man. The kind of person who believed in justice and doing the right thing. And now? Now he's consumed by grief and anger. He's convinced himself that I murdered his brother intentionally, and nothing will change his mind. But you didn't. No. But maybe that doesn't matter anymore. Maybe the truth is less important than what he needs to believe. Rebecca turned to face him. Do you think he'll hurt me? Jake wanted to lie, to reassure her that Danny would never cross that line. But lies wouldn't protect her, and she deserved honesty. I don't know. The Danny Brennan I knew before wouldn't hurt an innocent person. But grief can change people in terrible ways. Then, I guess we better make sure he doesn't get the chance. Jake's phone buzzed. Text message from an unknown number, * nice sunrise. Enjoy it. Might be the last peaceful one you see for a while, * Jake showed the message to Rebecca. Her face paled but her jaw set with determination. He's watching us. Jake scanned the tree line and distant hills, looking for the glint of binoculars or the silhouette of a hidden observer. Nothing visible, but Danny was out there somewhere, monitoring, planning, waiting for the right moment to strike. I need to get you somewhere safe, Jake said. Where? He seems to know everything about my life, my routine, where I live. Running won't solve anything. She was right. Danny had done his homework, studied the targets, learned the terrain. He would find Rebecca wherever she went, and moving her might just give him opportunities to act without witnesses. Jake's phone rang. Unknown number. Morrison. Good morning, Jake. Danny's voice was cheerful, almost friendly. Beautiful sunrise, isn't it? What do you want, Danny? Just checking in. Making sure you got my message. I got it. Good. I'd hate for there to be any misunderstanding about the situation. Jake walked away from Rebecca, not wanting her to hear both sides of the conversation. What situation is that? The one where you have something I want, and I have something you don't want to lose. Rebecca's got nothing to do with our business. Oh, but she does. She's your weakness, Jake. Your soft spot. The thing that will make you vulnerable. Touch her and I'll kill you. Danny laughed. There's the Jake Morrison I remember. The one who shoots first and asks questions later. Stay away from her. Can't do that. See, I've been thinking about justice, about what would be fair. Tommy's dead because of you. Your friend Rebecca is very much alive. Seems like an imbalance that needs correcting. Jake's grip tightened on the phone. You want me, come get me. Leave innocent people out of it. Where's the justice in that? You get to face your fate like a man while Tommy never had the chance? No, I think this needs to be messier. More personal. I think you need to watch someone you care about suffer the way my family suffered. The line went dead. Jake stared at the phone, mind racing through possibilities. Danny wasn't just threatening Rebecca to get Jake's attention. He was planning to hurt her as payment for Tommy's death. Eye for an eye, life for a life, suffering for suffering. The twisted logic of a man who'd let grief transform him into something monstrous. Rebecca was watching him from the porch, reading the bad news in his expression. What did he say? We need to leave. Now. Where are we going? Jake thought quickly. Danny knew about Rebecca's house, probably knew about Jake's ranch too. They needed somewhere unexpected, somewhere Danny wouldn't think to look. Somewhere with good defensive positions and multiple escape routes. I know a place. 30 minutes later, Jake's truck wound up a narrow dirt road into the hills above town, Rebecca beside him with a hastily packed bag. The road ended at an abandoned hunting cabin that Jake had discovered during his early explorations of the county. Built in the 1960s and forgotten for decades, the cabin sat on a ridge overlooking miles of forest and farmland. No electricity or running water, but solid construction and commanding views in all directions. This is your plan? Rebecca asked, staring at the weathered building. Hide in a shack in the woods? It's temporary. Just until I can figure out how to end this. They unloaded supplies and settled into the cabin's single room. Jake positioned himself at the window facing downhill, watching for approaching vehicles. Rebecca sat on the dusty sofa, looking small and frightened and completely out of place in the primitive surroundings. I'm sorry, Jake said. For what? For bringing this into your life. For putting you in danger. For destroying your peaceful existence. Rebecca was quiet for a long moment. You know what I was thinking about while I packed my things? How boring my life had become. Teaching the same lessons year after year, coming home to an empty house, watching television until I fell asleep alone. Maybe this isn't the kind of excitement I would have chosen, but at least I feel alive for the first time in years. Jake stared at her. You're not afraid? Terrified. But, also, I don't know. Hopeful? Like maybe something important is happening, something that will change everything. It might change everything. But, not necessarily for the better. Maybe. But, at least it won't be boring. Despite everything, Jake found himself smiling. Rebecca Walsh was full of surprises. Quiet strength hiding behind a gentle exterior. Courage masquerading as acceptance. The kind of woman worth fighting for. There's something else, Jake said. Something I should have told you earlier. What? The night Tommy Brennan died, there was something I never reported. Something that didn't come out in the investigation. Rebecca waited without speaking. Tommy called out when I spun around to face him. He said my name, identified himself as police. I heard him clearly. But, you shot him anyway. I shot him anyway. Not because I didn't recognize his voice, not because I thought he was a threat. I shot him because in that split second, with adrenaline pumping and fear taking over, my finger twitched on the trigger before my brain could process what I'd heard. Rebecca absorbed this confession in silence. It wasn't murder, Jake continued. It wasn't even negligence. It was just human error, the kind of tragic mistake that happens when people operate in high-stress situations. But, it was my mistake, and Tommy died because of it. Why didn't you report this? Because it wouldn't have changed anything legally, but it might have changed everything personally. Danny's family was already destroyed. Telling them that I heard Tommy identify himself but shot him anyway wouldn't have brought Tommy back, but it might have made their grief even harder to bear. So you've been carrying this alone for 3 years. Until now. Rebecca moved closer to him on the sofa. Thank you for telling me. I'm not sure why I did. Because you trust me. Because you needed someone to know the whole truth. She was right. For 3 years, Jake had carried the complete truth of that night alone, letting the official version become his reality. But the real version, the one where he'd heard Tommy's voice and shot him anyway, had been eating at him like acid. Do you think Danny suspects? I think Danny knows his brother well enough to know that Tommy would have identified himself. Whether he realizes the implications of that, I don't know. Jake's phone buzzed. Another text message, *nice view from up there. But even eagles can be brought down. Jake stood and moved to the window, scanning the forest below. Danny was still watching, still tracking their movements. The cabin wasn't the sanctuary Jake had hoped it would be. We need to move again, Jake said. Where? Jake made a decision that went against every tactical instinct he'd developed over 12 years of police work. Instead of running, instead of hiding, instead of letting Danny dictate the terms of their confrontation, Jake chose to take control. We're going back to town. We're going to find Danny and his friends, and we're going to end this. Is that smart? Probably not. But it's necessary. As they packed up their few belongings and prepared to leave the cabin, Jake's mind shifted into operational mode. Danny wanted a confrontation, wanted justice, wanted payment for his brother's death. Jake would give him all 3, but on terms that Danny wouldn't expect. The hunt was about to become a trap. The prey was about to become the predator. And the quiet rancher who'd been running from his past for 3 years was about to remember exactly who he used to be. Jake Morrison had come to the auction yard for cattle and left with a fight on his hands. Now it was time to finish what Danny Brennan had started. The only question was which of them would be walking away when the dust settled. The truck wound its way back down the mountain as afternoon shadows grew longer, carrying Jake and Rebecca toward whatever ending awaited them in the valley below. Behind them, the abandoned cabin sat empty again, holding its secrets like it had for decades. But the secrets Jake had shared there had changed everything. For the first time since that terrible night in Chicago, Jake Morrison felt ready to face the truth of what he'd done. And, more importantly, he felt ready to fight for a future that might actually be worth having. The reckoning had been 3 years in the coming. But, when it arrived, it would be on Jake's terms, in Jake's time, in Jake's place. Danny Brennan wanted justice for his brother's death. Jake Morrison would give him exactly what he deserved. The fight that had been brewing since the auction yard was about to reach its conclusion. And, this time, Jake wouldn't be running away from the past. He'd be running straight toward the future, with Rebecca beside him and the truth finally set free. Whatever happened next, it would happen honestly, completely, and without regret. Jake had carried his burden long enough. It was time to set it down and see what kind of man he could be without the weight of unspoken guilt crushing his shoulders. The sun was setting as they reached the valley floor, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. A beautiful end to a day that had changed everything. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new dangers, new choices. But tonight, for the first time in 3 years, Jake Morrison felt like he knew exactly who he was and what he was fighting for. And that made all the difference.